Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace.
Now I hear some of you out there saying, John, this title feels a little bit clickbaity. No, not this time. I've stumbled across a secret that has led me to question all things in time, space, reality, and of course, mini painting. When the new Space Dwarves arrived at my house, I was genuinely excited. These things really feel like they fit in the Warhammer universe. Their aesthetic is both new and on brand, but there is one problem. The color schemes of the different leagues are as boring as a church service when you were a kid. One main blocked in color that looks just like all the other Warhammer factions that are blocked in with one color, and then you slap on some beige, brown, and black with all the little details, and they called it done. But don't we want our armies to look cool and unique? Don't we want them to look more than the same bland stuff that's in this book? So instead of drawing inspiration for this book for my Leagues of Votann, I decided to come up with a color scheme inspired by a group of miniature artists that I have long looked up to, Craft World Studio. What makes Alexandra and Marco's style so interesting is their amazing use of color. Specifically, I'm looking at the color in their shadows. By creating shadows that are not just mixing in black to the base tone, so much depth is created. And to find out how they paint, sure, I could reach out to them and ask them how they do it, but that's no fun at all. Instead, I'm going to employ my favorite learning technique, what I like to call fuck around and find out. My smooth brain is having trouble trying to figure out how to achieve all this color depth in their style. So I'm deciding to keep it very simple, and I'm going to try to be able to replicate it over a large number of models if I want to. So I'm just going to prime the model white and then use 3 different colors as my base shadow tones. I'm priming in white first because I want the colors that are going to be my shadows to still be vibrant, but you could surely go with pretty much any colors you like. I spray the purple from below and to the left of the model, the blue from above like a zenithal prime, and then the magenta from above and to the right of the model in just a few select areas that I specifically want to draw more attention to from the viewer. And I chose these 3 colors specifically because I see them used often in the Craft World Studios paint schemes. And that way I know that it already works. So if I can figure this out with a color scheme that already works, I can then replicate it with whatever 3 or 4 colors I want to use for shadows in the future. And while I'd recommend an airbrush for this step, you could certainly set the tones using a base coat of the purple, followed by dry brushes of the blue and then the pink. I'm going to start with painting the armor, and the real key is mixing in a little bit of that blue used in the undercoat. This will harmonize our base color with that vibrant shadow underneath. The most important part of this base coating process is we don't entirely cover up that blue or purple shadow underneath. We need that still to live in the deepest recesses and all around the tiny details like the rivets. It's kind of a pain to make a mistake and cover an area of the shadow color because it's just not easy to correct that mistake. Because of this, I'm using a small brush and taking my time around these smaller details. But of course I did make some mistakes, and by and large I just didn't even go back and fix them. There's so many tiny little details on each one of these models that a couple of mistakes are probably not even going to be viewable even by the careful observer. The next really important factor I took away from painting in this style would be in paint consistency. I'm working with layers, not glazes. This means we can jump up our color changes quickly, but in order to ensure we achieve smooth transitions between colors, I want my paint to always have a healthy amount of water in it. I typically add 1 brushful of water for every 3 brushfuls of paint. Now, as I'm working up my highlights by adding in some ice yellow and white in successive increments, I want to have a serious conversation with you about your wet palette. It's an amazing tool for sure, but there's something I've noticed for years, but I just ignore the massive impact it has on how my paint works. Anytime you have paint on the palette and it's been sitting there for more than about 3 or 4 hours, even if you've kept the sponge filled with water, that paint has become a liability. It's super important that our paint acts the way we think it's going to act. No matter what brand it is, we kind of get a feel for it over time. And that careful formula between pigment, binder, and liquid all starts to get out of whack as time goes on and it's drying and it's rehydrating over and over again. So for the first time in a very long time on this model, I put out new paint every time I sat down to paint, and then about every 2 hours after that. And I tried to finish a section like this armor here in just one sitting. So I knew that my paint wasn't going to act differently if I came back to it later. This probably seems like a pretty silly tip, but honestly, we're gonna make enough of our own mistakes as we paint a model. Why don't we just prevent those avoidable ones that the paint is gonna cause us by trying to give it a little bit longer shelf life than it really should have? Once the armor is finished, I start on the light gray for his knee pads and one of his pauldrons. I keep wanting to say knee pit instead of knee pad, like armpit, elbow pit, knee pit. After finishing a bigger, more time-consuming section of the model, I like to work on a little detail or two, just to crank out some smaller stuff fast. This gives you a couple of quick victories in your painting process. I find I'll get burnt out by doing more of the intense parts of the model one right after the other. And there's not really any difference in my approach to the light gray compared to the armor, really. I'm just trying to keep those deepest shadows, trying to go back and forth between a brighter gray and the mid-tone gray to create a smooth transition on this tricky round surface. You ever feel like the secret sauce of how to get the final details of a model smooth is always like not quite captured on film when you're watching it on YouTube or on someone's Patreon? Well, I feel that too. So here I have an unedited shot of me attempting to smooth out the bright highlight in the midtone of the transition on this knee pad. For our dwarven face, I'm going to mix in some magenta to the skin tone, much in the same way I mixed in the ultramarine blue for the armor. And I'm sure Craft World Studios works with a much more complex, color-related theories behind how they paint the way they paint. But for me, this simple use of mixing in a bit of that shadow color to the first base tone allows me to move from that wild color to just about any color I want, and it still seems to work. Now, if you wanted a little bit more detail on how this color mixing with mother color works, you can check out my video in the top right corner, and I go through it a little bit more in detail there. I'm focusing almost all of the buildup of highlights above and to the right side of his face to keep our highlights in line with where I placed them on the armor. This also gives us a really cool blue to magenta shadow on the left side of his face without even having to put much paint there at all. Since I painted something difficult in the skin, I'm going to treat myself with a little bit of Diet Dew, as well as some small details like his beardy beard and these red tassels. Why do space dwarves need floppy tassels on their space backpacks anyway? These are the questions that keep me up at night. Let's dig into the last heavy-duty, serious aspect of this paint job, and that is all of the gold. Lately, I've been testing out this AK Interactive 3rd Gen paint to formulate my ideas on if I like it or not, and I realize I don't have the ideal colors to make my own non-metallic metal gold within this paint range, because I often think I need the perfect pre-mixed colors if I want to achieve anything the way it's supposed to look, and quite frankly, that's just not true. You can get a lot done with just a few colors. It almost makes me want to cut down on all the paints I own and just use a handful of colors. I could do that. I'm not going to. I prefer to be buried with every one of these paint bottles when I die. We're going from a very dark reddish brown to a very bright yellow orange over a very small space on all of this gold. So it creates even more of an opportunity to show the interesting shadow colors. I keep all the recessed areas on the filigree untouched. And at first, I wasn't really sure that this was going to look good at all. But to me, it really creates a great contrast of colors that makes the gold pop. I think part of the reason is the blue in the shadows and the orangish color of the gold are contrasting colors, and I really like how it turned out. So if you're thinking of trying this wild shadow color approach, one thing that I would suggest doing is thinking about what's the main color of your model. Then you can use that to help you determine what color shadows to use, both contrasting and complementary colors. There are a ton of tiny edge highlights and small details that I need to get a crisp line on for all of this gold. And there's a really important yet very basic process I go about to achieve this. First, you need to be working with fairly thin paint. I like to work in about a thin layer consistency. If it's too diluted, it's just like not gonna leave anything behind on the model, and you're gonna have to make that edge highlight 3 or 4 times for the color to show through. Next, I put the brush into the paint, making sure that I don't overload all the bristles with moisture in paint. I just want about the top third of the brush to have paint on it. Then I immediately go to a paper towel and I touch the brush to it 3 or 4 times. This will soak out any extra moisture and extra paint. Our goal is to have just a small amount of paint on that brush, so when we touch the edge of the model, just enough comes off to hit that edge and not spill over anywhere else. These couple of steps I've known about for a number of years now, as I've learned them from greater painters than me, but usually I'm just too lazy to go through the process and I just want to get to painting quickly. However, I've learned that without doing it this way, my edge highlights, my details, my fine work doesn't look nearly as good. Time to break out my big brush for the first time on this model and work on the cloak. I like to use a bigger brush when you have a larger, unimpeded surface like this cloak, and it really is satisfying to paint in those long, smooth strokes. And while I work my way through this cloak, I want to take a moment to thank all of the amazing patrons that make videos like this possible. Your support means that my dog gets fed. It means that I can afford to buy a new camera lens when I drop the current one on the cement, because yes, I did do that. And it means that I can commit my full-time energy to making videos like this each week. If you aren't yet a member of the Ninja on Patreon and wanted to check out the cool stuff you get for joining us for only a few bucks a month, just take a look at the link down in the video description. We're in the home stretch, people, and that just means a couple of details we need to crank out. The first one is this gun, which I really wanted to mostly be black. That seems standard for most Warhammer 40K guns. I was a little bit worried about how a black gun with a weird colored shadow would end up looking. Turns out, it still looks just fine. And as a bonus, all those little dealy bobs the gun has, you can just leave primed those cool under shadow colors and edge highlight them. And wham, you've got some interesting little color details with next to zero effort. Our final detail is the sword blade. And if I'm being completely honest with you, at this point in the painting process, I was running low on creative ideas as well as blood sugar, and the blade already had a cool transition from purple to blue to magenta, so I just edge highlighted it and called it good. And I guess that's an extra little bonus of painting in this weird shadow color style. These models are typically filled with all this little bullshit details, and just don't paint something if you don't want to. Throw a little edge highlight on there with that interesting shadow color and call it good. This whole process really made me think about my miniature painting as a whole way more than I had expected it to. Like, this is the first time I've ever really considered a dramatic change in how I approach mini painting moving forward. Will I paint every miniature in this way? No. But by testing out a different technique, by drawing inspiration from other amazing artists, and by having fun experimenting, I feel like I'm more well-rounded and more excited to try things like this than ever before. But I don't think my journey of this wild shadow color experiment ends here. I'm kind of wondering how this would look if it was scaled up, maybe to like a whole start collecting box or a army. How would that work? Could you still knock that out quickly and have a cool looking result like this? Well, if that's something you'd want to see in a video, please let me know down in the comments and maybe even recommend for me which faction you'd like to see painted that way. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I appreciate you sticking around all the way to the end of the video. If you like the channel and you want to support it, make sure you're subscribed first of all, but also check out all the goodies that I use in my daily mini painting down in the affiliate links below, as well as the store links. Those are stores that you can get an extra discount on, so you get the models you're already going to buy for cheaper, and it supports me as well. I'm going to see you back here again real soon, and sometime between now and then, make sure you find time in your day to slay the gray.
Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace, and I just recently started my own website using Squarespace, and it was incredibly easy to set up. Not only is having your own website great for showcasing your hobby or your interests, you can also create members only content, and you can manage those members. You can send them emails letting them know about updates. They can know whenever you post a new tutorial or blog. Everything is easy to use on one platform. So head on over to squarespace.com for your free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/ninjon for 10% off your purchase of a website or domain. A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video.
Where's my dew? While we wait, we hydrate. I'm focusing. It smells like my grandpa's medicine cabinet. I'm going to see you again back here real soon.